Thank you very much, and thank you for that blessedly short introduction. It was better than one I got on one occasion when the chairman said, "And now we come to Anne Widdecombe, who always impresses the House of Commons with her debatable qualities." Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. It seems that everywhere we look today, across the world, Christians are being asked to take up their cross. And we should not imagine for one moment that persecution of Christians is limited solely to those countries where there are fundamentalist Islamic regimes and only a very tiny proportion of the population is Christian. It is vastly more widespread than that, though naturally enough it varies in intensity and severity according to the country in which it is happening. And we are not immune here in Britain today. Time after time now we open our newspapers and we read of people who are being persecuted or prosecuted or threatened with loss of their jobs because they are adhering openly to their Christian faith. There was the Lancashire couple who wrote to their local council and asked if they could place Christian literature on marriage in register offices where it would be seen alongside the council's own literature on civil partnerships. The council could simply have said no. But it went further than that. It called in the police, who then interviewed that couple for an hour and 40 minutes in their own home under our supposed hate laws. There was the children's author Lynette Burrows, who was asked, she did not volunteer, who was asked in the course of a radio programme if she believed that homosexual couples should be allowed to adopt children. She said no. And when she got home, she had to take a phone call from the police. We can list many other examples of where Christian conscience and the equality laws have run up against each other, from street preachers, from people who hand out leaflets, from the guest house owners, Peter and Hazel Mary Bull, all the way through to Catholic adoption societies, which have had to close if they are not prepared to contravene the Church's teaching and place children with homosexual couples. But don't let's imagine for one moment that it is all about Christians and the equality laws, because it is now sufficient to wear a cross to be threatened in some quarters with loss of a job. It can be a very discreet cross. It can be concealed beneath a garment and only visible from time to time. It doesn't matter. There are those who have rules which say you cannot display a cross. British Airways is an obvious example. But the same prohibition does not apply to other faiths. Sikhs, for example, may, as they should be, allowed to wear turbans. They can wear friendship bangles. Muslims can wear head coverings. That is all perfectly proper. But so it is also perfectly proper that Christians, therefore, should be able to display their religious symbols as well. Oh, but it goes beyond that. You don't even have to be wearing a symbol. It is enough now to say, God bless you, to find that you're the subject of a complaint, that you're suspended while your conduct is examined. It is enough to offer to pray for a patient, merely to offer, not actually to start a prayer in their presence, but it is enough to offer to pray for a patient, to find the same threat to one's employment. And nor is this just something that's happened in the last couple of years. I think we all remember the Millennium celebrations in 2000, obviously, when the government decided, the Blair government decided, that it would not have a prayer at the Millennium celebrations. Now, if we weren't actually celebrating 2,000 years of Jesus Christ, I don't quite know what we were celebrating. We couldn't measure 2,000 years of anything else, but it was said that it would offend other faiths. Of course, it does not offend other faiths at all. Other faiths don't understand the seeming eagerness of those in authority in a Christian country to stop Christians openly proclaiming and proselytizing their religion. We've had schools banning hot cross buns, the Red Cross removing nativity displays from high street shop windows. Now, I can understand you wouldn't want a nativity display in a high street in Saudi Arabia, but Maidstone High Street, I mean, come on. The examples are too numerous. And of course, increasingly, because of the equality laws and sometimes because of other considerations, Christians are feeling uncomfortable about running guest houses, about being printers, about designing websites, about working in register offices, because any moment they may be required to do something or to promote something that is against their conscience. However, we don't face imprisonment. We don't face death. We don't face having our homes destroyed. We don't face, by and large, being abused in the street. But all across the world, Christians are facing those things on a daily basis. Now, until I became involved with Aid to the Church in Need, I assumed what I said at the beginning, which was, yes, of course there was persecution of Christians, but it was largely in those countries which have strong Islamic regimes and where Christians are in a very tiny minority. And that was what I thought happened. But that is not so at all. So let us begin with a rather surprising example. Let us begin with Belarus, where 73%, it's nearly 3/4, for those of you who, like me, have to convert these things, 73% of the population is Christian. And you might therefore have thought, that's fine, that's a guarantee that there won't be any persecution. But the opposite is in fact true. In 2002, a law was passed recognising traditional faiths, which were defined as Orthodox, Catholics, and Muslims. But other Christian groups were not given the protection of law. And worse than that, they have actually been persecuted by the state. Their meetings have been raided. Their property has been seized. They have been fined for unauthorized religious activity. In Belarus, the state plans to transform places of worship into secular buildings, such as hotels. And that includes the 17th century monastery and its attached church. Visas, even for visiting priests and nuns, despite the theoretical recognition of Catholicism, and certainly for Protestant pastors, are very difficult to acquire. There are fines for holding religious events in the privacy of one's own home. And that is a country in which 73% of the population is Christian. So if it can happen there, it can certainly happen in those countries where the percentage of the population that is Christian is very small. In Bangladesh, for example, women have been beaten and the homes of apostates have been destroyed. But we do need to distinguish, and this is an important distinction which we have to make, between those states where the persecution of Christians is actually carried out by the state, either directly or through the willful turning of blind eyes, and the persecution of Christians where it is the work of zealot groups. And largely in Bangladesh, it is the work of zealot groups. And so the duty, therefore, of Britain is to put pressure on Bangladesh to make sure that the law is properly policed and that religious freedom is a reality rather than just a theory. And if that means controlling the extreme zealots, then that is what it should mean. Of course, we often think, well, it's bound to be Muslim zealots. Oh, no, it's not. There are examples in Bangladesh of Buddhist extremists taking Christians captive, making them shave their heads, clean the temples, and wear robes. So we shouldn't run away with the notion that persecution only comes from one other faith or from secularism. It doesn't. There are religious tensions between different faiths in different parts of the world. In Afghanistan, for example, apostasy and conversion to Christianity can actually land you in court. We need to consider that. Can actually land you in court. The court is not a place of some rogue zealot group. The court is an agency of the state. In Saudi Arabia, the Ministry of the Interior sanctions raids on private religious gatherings. And you can be arrested, and people have been arrested, for taking part in a private mass. So this is not even an objection to proselytation or to witness. It's an objection to private practice, which can result in action by the state. And of course, in some countries, the level of persecution is such that Christians are leaving en masse where they can. An example of that is Iraq, where a massacre of 52 Christians in 2010 caused a very great degree of nervousness in others. And it's certainly a country in which the murder of Christians is not uncommon. In Iran, there can still be the death penalty for apostasy, despite an amendment supposedly not allowing that. In Pakistan, people can be charged under the blasphemy laws. And to be blasphemous, it isn't necessary to blaspheme. It is necessary merely to adhere to the Christian faith. Now, that is a wide range of countries. In some, as I say, it's not the state. We do need to make that distinction, and we do need to understand the difference between trying to pressurize a country to be more tolerant from a state point of view and trying to pressurize a country to enforce laws which are supposedly there to guarantee religious freedom. But what can we actually do? Now, I'm patron of the Hedgehog Protection Society, and it's very easy to get people excited about the fate of hedgehogs. I regularly do so I know it's very easy. And if I put on a collection for hedgehogs, people are very keen to contribute. but try exciting people about the persecution of Christians. First of all, there is a great degree of ignorance. Secondly, there is a degree of shrug, because people tend to say, well, they must bring it on themselves. They don't have to be overt, do they? And yet, if we simply shrug, and I'm not suggesting the people in this room shrug, but if as a country we shrug, then we actually deny help. So we need to be galvanised, and we need to start taking action. So what can we actually do? I know that when we face situations like this, individuals always say to me, okay, but what can I do to make a difference? Well, when it was known that I was making this speech, Andrew Mitchell himself phoned me up last night. And I thought, good, there's now a dialogue opened on the subject of what we can do to support Christians abroad. Now, we've already been told in the last couple of weeks that countries which persecute homosexuals can be denied aid. Fine. Got no problems with that at all. Especially as, and we should understand this, and I have to say last night the Secretary of State was very keen for me to make this point, especially as when we talk about denying aid, we are not talking about the funding simply drying up. What we are talking about is saying we will no longer make it through national governments. Instead, we will channel it in through the voluntary organisations, through NGOs, and through other bodies. But we won't just hand it to national governments if they lock people up simply for sexual practices. Now, that seems to me fine. But, as I said to him, okay, why not do it for Christians? Why not do it for other groups? Why have we got the emphasis just on this one group? So the first thing we have to say is, right, you've already established a principle that you will link the method by which you give aid, and national governments do like to have control of funding, and when it just bypasses them, it can irritate them just a little bit. So you say, right, we've already established that you will link the control of aid to the practices of countries when it comes to persecuting individual groups. So therefore, can we assume that this will also apply to Christian groups? Now, the Secretary of State said to me last night that it will. Great. In that case, we all need to write to him with a specific example. And so and he was very clear on that as well. He said, Anne, you've got to give me specific examples. I don't want generalities. I can't do anything with generalities. And he's right. So we should all give him specific examples. So I recommend to you, if you haven't already got it, get it. Persecuted and forgotten. And then I also recommend that every parish should adopt a country. Don't forget this one, by the way. Every parish should adopt a country because it is very difficult to follow everything minutely. It is simply difficult. And monitor what goes on in that country through aid to the church in need and through the information they put out, and raise the individual specifics of that country with the Secretary of State, but also with your own MP. Because let me tell you what happens to correspondence with the Secretary of State. It doesn't actually cross his desk unless it comes through an MP. And if it comes through an MP, it must cross at least a minister's desk and be signed off by a minister. So don't assume that if you write to the Secretary of State, whether it's for overseas development or whether it's for foreign affairs, that William Hague or Andrew Mitchell are actually going to sit down and read it, because they ain't. It will disappear in the bowels of the correspondence department. And the standard down there is normally 2 months for a reply. So do make representations, specific ones, not vague ones, specific ones about specific cases. You can get the information through Aid to the Church in Need. Make representations to your own MP. Go and see him. Take a delegation to see him. If you are confident enough to see him or her without a delegation, great. That means that 6 of you, instead of going to one surgery, 1 of you can go to each of 6 surgeries. And the impression then is made that actually this is a matter of serious concern. So that is the first thing. It is not the slightest good calling upon the government to do something over Sunday lunch. Doesn't get done. What has to happen is that there has to be a build-up of awareness. And that is what we lack at the moment, awareness. And we need to build it up within Westminster, but also, to a greater degree, throughout the country, so that people get it into their consciousness, and believe me, it takes time. They get it into their consciousness that there is a problem across the world with the persecution of Christians. So, in addition to making representations, and don't forget when you're making representations that the most effective one you can make is to actually pray, because he's got quite a lot of power. But when you're making representations, there is something else that we can do. You can write direct, and it's perfectly permissible to do so, to the ambassador for that country here in Britain. You can do that. You'll get an answer from an aide, but the aide will report, I've had 100 letters this week on the case of Mrs. So-and-so. It pays off. But also, raise awareness, as I say, amongst the public. That means letters to local papers, taking part in phone-ins when you think you can shoehorn in that appropriate bit, putting on high-profile fundraising events, and always focusing in doing that on specific examples. It is not the slightest bit of good writing a letter saying, "Dear Sir, Christians are persecuted abroad." Means nothing. The only time the country even begins to focus on it is when somebody is facing the death penalty. And then a tremendous amount of pressure is brought from across the world. But pretty well anything short of that goes ignored and unchallenged. So we do need to raise awareness at Westminster, to make representations to government, to make representations to the representatives of individual countries. But above all, simply to get everybody saying, so that it isn't just the concern of a group of devoted Christians, to get everybody saying, hang on, it really isn't right that there is so little religious freedom in so many countries. Of course, I dare say, it is a bit embarrassing for our government to make representations when this is the country in which just by saying God bless, you can risk the loss of your job. But nevertheless, there are very many worse forms of persecution going on. And I think that it is right now that we try to get that to the forefront of people's minds. And I can tell you that will take a good year. It is very rare unless some major event happens, and in a way, maybe we should have been better geared up to have taken advantage of what happened in Egypt, when an Arab Spring turned into a Christian autumn. And maybe we should have been better geared up for that. But sometimes an event like that will impinge on people's consciousness, will raise questions, and we have to take advantage of it. But even those big events are no substitute for long, hard slog from one year's end to the next, until suddenly one day you realize that you're no longer having to tell people what's going on because they already know it. And that is the foundation stone for them actually caring about it. They have first to know it. So I leave you with those thoughts. I'm delighted now to be associated with Aid to the Church in Need. I've certainly learned a great deal since being associated with them. I want everybody else to learn that too. And because they won't come to us, we have to go to them and to take the message out.